Hello, welcome to the 22nd episode of the Twisted States podcast, where we take a look state by state of some of America's most nefarious killers, elusive cryptids, and bizarre mysteries. I'm your host, Reagan. Join me as we delve into the odd tale of the Clifton Bridge Bunnyman. We're going to try our best to follow the path this tale of one unusual event, or small little pocket of isolated events, took into becoming a full-blown urban legend. But first, let's take a quick look at the state where this all takes place. Virginia. So officially, the Commonwealth of Virginia, referred to as the Old Dominion, founded as the colony of Virginia in 1607, making it the first permanent English colony in the New World. Virginia was the 10th state to join the Union on June 25th, 1788, and nicknamed the birthplace of President. Wow. No. Just going to leave it in there. My editing is going to be minimal on this. The birthplace of presidents. Before being colonized, Virginia was the home of the Powhatan. They were an Algonquin people. They were in the area for a long time before this area was colonized by the British. There's evidence going back at least 17,000 years ago of the area being, the area that's known as modern day Virginia being frequented by nomadic native hunters. So it definitely has a long history of indigenous people living there before, this happened. Anyway, so we're going to hop right in and we're going to start off by going over something that I had to go dig around on the Wayback Machine to find. The Clifton Bunnyman. This was listed as a classic ghost story on castleofspirits.com. And it's quite the embellishment, but you know what? It's kind of fun. We're gonna go through it, take a look here, okay? And then after I read through this, we're going to take a look at some little more factual things. But this is still fun, don't get me wrong. The tale of the Bunnyman goes back many, many years. Originally, it didn't start until 1931, after many murders had already been committed. For verification of the story, you can visit the Old Clifton Library, located in Clifton, North Virginia, USA. What I'm about to tell you is entirely true. Although I've never seen the Bunnyman, everyone in Clifton believes it to be true. Quick reference to help you understand the story. The bridge has a one-lane car road passing underneath a dual railroad track. Above it, within the woods along a gravel road. Back in 1903, deep in Clifton, there used to be an asylum buried deep within the wilderness of Clifton. Pretty soon after the Civil War, people started inhabiting the area, population-wise around 300 or so. It was a very small town. Nonetheless, people didn't like the idea about having an asylum miles down the road, so they all got together and signed a petition stating for the asylum to relocate elsewhere. The petition passed, and a new asylum was built, which is now known as Lorton Prison, a temporary facility until convicts are appropriately sentenced. In fall of 1904, the convicts were gathered and piled into the bus which was to transport them to Lorton. Somehow, during the drive, not too far from where they left, the driver had swerved to avoid something and the bus had started to tip and soon was rolling in a terrible collision course. Most of the convicts were injured but had managed to escape the bus and had fled into the night woods. Later on the next morning, a local police investigation had begun, and they had begun rounding up the escaped convicts. Hours turned into days, days into weeks, weeks into months. Everyone was recovered after 4 months, except for 2 people, Marcus A. Wallister and Douglas J. Griffin. During the search for both men, the police randomly found dead rabbits half-eaten and dismembered every now and then along their search. Finally, they were to find Marcus dead himself by the Fairfax Station Bridge, known as Bunnyman's Bridge. In his hand, he held a man-made hammer/knife-looking tool made with a sharp rock and a pretty sturdy branch as a handle. They thought nothing and cared not of how he died, only that he was apprehended and no longer had to worry about him. They had a name for Marcus, but later on, they would realize they had named the wrong person, the Bunnyman. Still searching for Douglas, they kept on finding dead, half-eaten bunnies every so often while the search went on. Finally, they were to name Douglas the Bunnyman from then on. 3 months passed by and the police had given up their search. On April 7th, 1905, everybody assumed the Bunnyman was dead by now, if not gone. So they went on with their small-town lives. Come October, people started seeing dead bunnies reappearing out of the blue and starting to fear the unseen. Halloween night came around, and as usual, a bunch of kids had gone over to the bridge that night to drink and do whatever kids their age in the 1900s did. Midnight came around within minutes, and most of the kids had left. Only 3 of them remained at the bridge. Right around midnight, supposedly, a bright light back from within the bridge where the kids were, and less than a couple seconds later, they were all dead. See what I'm saying about the grammar here? This is wild. Throats slashed with that same type of tool that was found by the other escapee, Marcus. Not only were their throats slashed, but all up and down their chests were long slashes gutting them. To top it off, the Bunnyman hung both of the guys from one end of a bridge with a rope around their neck, hanging from the overpass with their legs dangling in front of the pass of cars. The women were hung the same way, on their side of the bridge. This happened on Halloween in 1905. After that, they didn't see or heard anything from them for another year. In Halloween of 1906, Halloween 1906 was approaching, and parents as well as the teens in Clifton still remember the incident that had occurred 1 year ago at the bridge. His bridge. Bunnyman's bridge. That night, 7 teens were left remaining right before midnight at the bridge. Thinking little of it, 6 remained inside the bridge while one, Adrian Hatala, had remained a good distance from the bridge, hoping to have enough time to escape if the same thing happened again. At midnight, she witnessed only this, a dim light walking the railroad track right before midnight, stopping right above the bridge at midnight, then disappearing at the same time as a bright flash was inside the bridge. She heard the deafening sounds of horrific screams coming from inside the bridge that lasted only seconds. 5 seconds later, they were all hung from the edge of the bridge, same style as the corpses a year earlier. Horrified, she ran home. She didn't tell of everything she saw, just spattered words here and there that some of the folk put together to come up with her story. No one understood it, or even believed her. They charged her with the murder and locked her up in the asylum of Lorton. In 1913, the same thing happened with 9 teenagers this time. Halloween night again. Adrian was still locked up. They dropped her sentence, but it was too late. The insanity had finally conquered her. Even if she was released, she was too far gone to have a decent life. So she spent her remaining years in the asylum until she finally died in 1953 of shock. No one knows what exactly she died in shock from, but supposedly she had died in her dreams, dreaming of that one dreaded night. Perhaps the Bunnyman had finally gotten to her. More murders were to take place, however, although after the murders in 1913, most people stayed clear of the bridge on Halloween. 1943 rolls around and 6 teenagers go strolling out on a Halloween night. A couple hours later, all of them dead, same way as the others. Investigations took place, but as usual, nothing was discovered. 1976, the same situation occurs, this time with only 3 people. The only other incident that occurred since that was in 1987, 12 years ago. Janet Charletier, was enjoying the night with her 4 friends. Halloween night had finally come and they had gone driving out to enjoy the night after invading the children's candy bags. They had settled around 11 at the bridge, waiting for midnight to come. They didn't believe in the myth, so they decided to see for themselves, and were bound to be the only ones who actually witnessed the Bunnyman and withstood him. They had waited around 55 minutes or so, almost at midnight, until Janet started getting a little scared. They all had been pulling pranks on each other, jumping out of the bushes and screaming, so she was already a little worked up. Midnight hits. While she's completely freaked out, she's almost out of the bridge when the lights get really bright inside the bridge. When that happens, her body is halfway outside of the bridge. She sees her skin start tearing at her chest, but nothing is piercing her skin. She manages finally to exit the bridge. Completely horrified, she hits a hanging body and knocks herself out. When she wakes up, she finds her hair has turned white and she has been bleeding. She was lucky that the cut had just started and wasn't very bad at all. She left and never returned to the bridge again. She's been sitting on a swinging bench on her balcony every morning, just staring in the direction towards the bridge a couple miles down the road. To this day, you can still find her on that bench every morning. From then on, the story dwells untouched and unmoved. Halloween night, you will find a bunch of people hanging around the bridge, drinking, smoking up, but within minutes of midnight, everyone leaves. It's been like that for the past 5 years that I've visited the bridge on Halloween night. Even if it's not Halloween night, any night you go there, you feel the presence of death awaiting the night sky of Halloween, yearning for more blood to be split in his name, spilt in the name, his name, Bunnyman. Okay, so there's a tale. Here's a short myth. Halloween night comes around. Nothing happens until midnight. Right before midnight, supposedly a bunny or two enters the bridge. Right before midnight, his soul, a dim light, walks the tracks above the bridge. When midnight hits, his soul stops right above the bridge, dead center, and disappears, only to reappear inside the bridge. From then on, it's his soul which lights up the whole area so brightly that you can't even see him. That's when he instantly kills you by slitting your throat and slashing your chest, only to hang you at the edge of the bridge. You can even see the rub marks that have worn away at the rock where the bodies were swinging. Whoever is inside the bridge ends up dead. And the little closeout says, thanks for taking the time to read this. And remember, everything except for the actual myth has been in Clifton's records since the date it happened. The old Clifton Library still stands, containing those records on microfiche, however you spell it. I've looked it up myself, and it's still a mystery. I'm thinking of taking this to Unsolved Mysteries. Let me know if you have any comments. Timothy C. Forbes, Virginia, USA. All right, so now we're going to take a look at The Bunnyman Unmasked, the real-life origins of an urban legend, written by Brian A. Conley, historian, archivist, Fairfax County Public Library. The introduction. There's a story that a man dressed as a bunny haunts the residential neighborhoods around our nation's capital. Silly as this may sound at first, the Bunnyman has been a fixture of local legend for at least 30 years. By 1973, the so-called Bunnyman had been reported in Maryland and the District of Columbia. His infrequent and widespread appearances tended to occur in secluded locations and usually tell of a figure clad in a white bunny suit armed with an axe, threatening children or vandalizing property. By the 1980s, the Bunnyman had become an even more sinister figure, with several gruesome murders to his credit. Although he's been reported as far south as Culpeper, Virginia, his main haunt has been the area surrounding a railroad pass near Fairfax Station, Virginia, frequented by partygoers and now the infamous Bunnyman Bridge. The legend. For more than 25 years, stories of the Bunnyman have been kept alive primarily amongst our teenage population. Over the years, the story has evolved into a ghost story suitable for parties, campouts, and any occasion that such tales are exchanged. It was at one such gathering in 1976 that the author first heard it told. The Bunnyman was said to be responsible for the deaths of 2 disobedient children in the Clifton area. Others were rumored to have disappeared, and there was talk of animals found horribly mutilated. I never saw the Bunnyman myself, but then I never strayed into the woods at night, especially not near the bridge. Most childhood ghost stories are forgotten as one gets older. However, the Bunnyman followed me. After graduating from college, I accepted a position with the Fairfax County Public Library, eventually becoming an information specialist in the Virginia room. One day, around 1992, a very well-spoken young lady came into the Virginia room with a question. She wanted to know how she could find information on a murder that was supposed to have taken place near her home. As I interviewed the patron to ascertain what hard facts she had to go on, some vague memory nagged at me. 2 children were allegedly murdered by a local hermit for trespassing, and their bodies left hanging from a covered bridge. She had no names and only a vague idea of a time frame. The whole story seemed a little fantastic, but the thing that really bothered her was the guy was supposed to be an escaped inmate dressed in a bunny suit. At this point, even though the story had evolved a bit, I recognized the tale from my own youth. We were unable to confirm any of the elements of the story as she or I had first heard it, and I put it down in my mind as a story fabricated to scare children. I likely would have forgotten about the Bunnyman again if the questions didn't begin to come on a regular basis. The Bunnyman has actually begun appearing in print in recent years, having been mentioned in several high school newspapers, and more recently on the internet. The various internet versions have carried the story to new heights. The most widely circulated written version, entitled The Clifton Bunnyman and signed by Timothy C. Forbes, Virginia, was posted on a website called Castle of Spirits around 1999. That's a story I just read to you. This version of the tale is actually quite notable because of the number of specific facts given. Forbes claims that in 1904, inmates from an insane asylum escaped while being transferred to Lorton Prison. One of these escapees, Douglas J. Griffin, murdered fellow escapee Marcus Wallister and eventually became the Bunnyman. Not only is the location identified, but also the names of several victims and the dates of their murders. The story ends with a challenge for the reader to check with the Clifton Town Library for verification of the facts. Little effort was required to show that all of the specifics given in the Forbes version are false. First, there's never been an asylum for the insane in Fairfax County. Second, Lorton Prison didn't come into existence until 1910, and even then, it was an arm of the District of Columbia Correction System, not Virginia's. Third, neither Griffin nor Wallister appear in the court records of Fairfax County. And lastly, there is not and never has been a Clifton Town Library. The story also received wide recognition after being featured on national television. The program called Scariest Places on Earth, broadcast on the Fox Family Channel, included a segment called Terror on Bunnyman's Bridge in the 2001 broadcast season. Even though these fictional tales of spectacular crimes are easy to dismiss as fiction, the question of the story's origin is not, was the Bunnyman real? At first, I was content to dismiss the Bunnyman as completely fictitious. However, I have learned that many legends do have some basis in factual events. At the urging of a fellow employee, I finally began a more serious search for the Bunnyman. I began with a few basic assumptions. First, although the tale is told in jurisdictions all around the Washington, D.C. area, the bulk of them take place in Fairfax County. Second, any event that gains as much notoriety as this one must have been originally reported to the public. Third, the original event was probably criminal in nature. Was the Bunnyman a murderer? The aspect of the story which gets the most attention are the alleged murders. Researching historical crimes can be very difficult unless you have some basic facts to begin with. Since police records are not available for casual review and court records are indexed by the names of those involved, not by location or type of crime, I had to begin by checking the local newspapers. The tool that has proved the most valuable was the Fairfax County Public Library Historical Newspaper Index. Virginia Room volunteers Malcolm Richardson and Barbara Welsh worked for 10 years to compile a complete index to local Fairfax County newspapers. The careful work of these two, combined with the searching capabilities of a computer database, allowed us to extract every murder and killing reported by the local press from 1872 through 1973. Even though Fairfax County was a rural farming community until well into the 20th century, there were over 550 individual mentions of killings in the study period. Jesus. Wow. Eliminating run-of-the-mill domestic murders and concentrating on multiple murders and those involving children, both of which were mercifully rare, served to pare down a list of more than 500 possible events to the following three. Number 1, Francis and June Holober, February 1949. It would be hard to imagine a more disturbing event for a growing community like Fairfax than the gruesome murders of 37-year-old Frances Hobler and her 8-month-old daughter, June. On Thursday, February 24th, 1949, Mrs. Hobler and her daughter drove to Fairfax County in the company of her estranged husband, Charles. All were residents of the District of Columbia. Charles Hobler later told police that they'd come to see the new lodge at a nudist colony to which Mr. Hobler belonged. Wow. Upon leaving the lodge, the car became mired in some mud. The couple quarreled, and Mrs. Hobler took the child and walked away from her husband and never returned. Charles Hobler spent the night in the car and got a ride back to Washington the next day. He returned with his brother-in-law and a friend to retrieve the car. Still finding no evidence of his family, the police were finally notified. An intensive search of the area was organized involving Fairfax County Police, Washington detectives, and Boy Scouts. Jeez, could you imagine? Could you imagine getting in a car and leaving your like wife and baby? Bae. Like the fact that he left them not knowing where they were when he left is crazy. At about 5 p.m., just as the searchers were about to give up for the night, one of the detectives noted that the ground on which they were standing was very soft. Both mother and daughter were found in a shallow grave next to the lodge and less than 200 yards from where Charles Hobler's car had been stuck. Frances Hobler had been beaten and then shot once in the head and once in the heart. The baby girl had been buried alive. The local community was shocked and horrified by the cold, brutal character of the crime, especially when the investigation identified Charles Hobler as the prime suspect. Hobler later confessed to investigators that he had planned the murder for 3 weeks and had not intended to report the disappearance of his wife, but changed his plan when the car got caught in the mud. The case came to trial on January 16, 1950. After hearing 4 days of testimony, the jury returned a verdict of guilty, and Hobler was sentenced to die in the electric chair. Hobler's attorney, T. Brooke Howard, filed an appeal alleging that the jury failed to give proper consideration to the plea of insanity and that the court made errors in its instruction to the jury. But it was like totally premeditated. That's first-degree murder. He was talking about it for like weeks. 3 weeks he had planned the murder, and if it wasn't for the fact that his car got stuck, he never would have reported them fucking missing. Like, wow. The Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals eventually overturned the conviction and ordered a new trial. Charles Francis Hobler was recommitted to the Western State Mental Hospital at Marion, Virginia, where he was judged to be insane. It's interesting to note that this was the first time since the Ridgway murder trial of 1927 in which a Fairfax County jury invoked the death penalty. That's crazy. Number 2, Minnie, Loretta, and Catherine Ridgway, March 1927. The available newspapers record many murders, but few shocked Fairfax like the ferocious and senseless attack on Mrs. Minnie Ridgway and her 2 young daughters. Mrs. Ridgway lived with her husband and 3 children on Telegraph Road in Alexandria. Sometime on the morning of March 4th, 1927, a man later identified as Louis Borsig called at the home on the pretext of seeing Mr. Ridgway. Upon finding that he was not at home, Borsig attacked and beat Minnie Ridgway into unconsciousness and then likewise bludgeoned her daughters, Loretta, 7, and Catherine, 5. He then stole money from the home and fled. Jeez. The crime was discovered by a neighbor who heard moans coming from inside the house. All 3 victims were taken to Alexandria Hospital, where Loretta later died. Catherine Ridgway lived another 8 days before succumbing to her injuries. Minnie recovered and was able to identify the assailant, who was known to the Ridgways. Borsig was arrested at his home and transferred to jail in Winchester for his safety. Because this is a small community. I'm sure he was not real popular when he got arrested there. Louis Borsig was executed for the murders of Loretta and Catherine Ridgway on July 7th, 1927, just 3 months after his horrific crime. Wow, that's fast. Rob, what? I've never heard, like, they executed him 3 months after he was sentenced? That's fast, right?
Yeah. Crazy.
I've never heard of that. Usually people sit on death row for like ever. Number 3, Eva Roy, August 1918. Peter Roy was a Danish immigrant who had come to Fairfax from Minnesota in 1912. In November of that year, he purchased 2 parcels of land near the current intersection of Old Keene Mill Road and Sidenstricker Road. Wow, these names are crazy. Totaling 180 acres. Roy, a widower, became a prosperous farmer and an active member of the Lee Chapel Methodist Church. With him resided his eldest daughter, Caroline, her husband, William K. German, and his younger daughter, Eva. On the morning of August 4th, 1918, Eva Roy, age 14, left her home near Burke around 9 a.m. to tend to her father's small herd of cows. When Eva failed to return home that evening, her father began a search. Neighbors were soon enlisted to help, but it was some 24 hours later that her body was found tied to a tree in the woods near the old Haynes house. Her apron strings tied tight about her throat. The county coroner, Dr. W.I. Roby, concluded that the girl had been brutally assaulted before being strangled to death. A coroner's jury was appointed and quickly concluded, "We, the jury, find that Eva Roy came to her death at the hands of some unknown person, and the indications point to Lou Hall as the probable perpetrator of the crime." Hall, a 33-year-old woodcutter, lived about a half mile from the scene of the crime and was seen in the woods near the time of the girl's disappearance. Wrong place, wrong time. I mean, if he didn't do it, that'd really suck, right? The case was not to be easily solved, however, as other suspects were soon identified and eventually eliminated. The first, William Wooster, age 16, was soon arrested for assaulting a quote-unquote colored girl. He had recently been released from an insane asylum, but was found that he was nowhere near the scene of Eva's murder. The next suspect to emerge was a soldier who deserted from Camp A. Humphreys, now Fort Belvoir. The soldier, a sergeant whom the papers failed to name, was located some days later near Charlottesville, Virginia. He had scratches on his face and hands, was wearing freshly laundered clothes, and claimed to have no memory of the events between him leaving Camp Humphreys and his capture. Sheriff Allison traveled to Charlottesville to interview the man, but after some weeks of investigation determined that he was not connected with the crime. The lagging investigation seemed to finally receive a break with the apprehension of Ben Rubin, an escaped inmate from Lorton Prison. Rubin, who had been serving a 3-year sentence for housebreaking, was arrested in by Washington, D.C. police on September 19th for assaulting a little girl. While on the way to the police station, he confessed to Eva's murder. Rubin claimed that he met Eva Roy looking after her father's cows. He asked her for food, and in a conversation with her, he told her he was an ex-convict. She declared she would turn him up as he declared, and he became excited and choked her. What? The Washington authorities were unconvinced by Rubin's story and wanted to try him for assault and theft before turning him over to the Virginia court. An investigator sent by the Commonwealth of Virginia to interview Rubin concluded that he was not responsible for the crime, but extradition papers were filed anyway. On September 26th, Rubin was escorted to the scene of the crime by Sheriff Allison, Commonwealth Attorney C. Vernon Ford, Assistant Commonwealth Attorney Wilson M. Farr, Dr. Sweetnam, and Acting Counsel for the Defense F.D. Richardson. After being unable to locate the scene of the attack, or the tree where the body was left, Rubin denied killing Eva. He claimed the presence of the girl's father spurred him to recant his confession. Rubin's motive for confessing was revealed some weeks later when on October 6th he escaped from the jail in Fairfax. He was arrested 2 days later while attempting to buy a pistol and admitted that he had concocted his story in order to be transferred to Fairfax, where he thought escape would be easier. Wow. He was eventually convicted of burglary and escape from jail and was sentenced to 4 more years in prison. That's not long enough. Oh my God. Lou Hall was finally tried for the murder in Fairfax County Court. The prosecution was handled by State's Attorney C. Vernon Ford, assisted by Wilson M. Farr. The defense was provided by Walter T. Oliver. His first trial resulted in a hung jury with 9 votes for guilty, 3 for innocent. His second trial resulted in a clear verdict of not guilty. Peter Roy died on January 22, 1938, and was interred in Lee Chapel Cemetery next to his youngest daughter. Her murderer was never found. After scrutinizing the 3 preceding events, I concluded that none are likely candidates for the Bunnyman. Charles Hobler was caught and incarcerated. Louis Borzig was caught and summarily executed, and the murder of Eva Roy, even though it has many of the elements that a legend could build upon, is simply too old. This last assertion is based upon one other important factor that has emerged through my research. The Bunnyman, like any good legend, has evolved over time. The recent rash of persons researching the origins of this story have been largely attracted by the spectacular nature of the alleged crime. The previously cited Forbes version of the story features 32 victims and has a pronounced supernatural element. This contrasts sharply with versions of the tale I collected from the 1980s, which generally involved only 1 to 3 victims, usually children. More importantly, the earliest versions dating to the 1970s did not mention any deaths at all. These earliest versions recount acts of vandalism, usually against secluded residential construction sites or couples parked at secluded lovers' lane type locations, being accosted or threatened by a strange individual dressed in a white bunny costume. More research was clearly needed. Fact versus folklore. After nearly 8 years of research, I finally got a solid lead. The November 11th, 2000 Washington Post ran an article highlighting an interesting collection called the Maryland Folklore Archive. From the 1950s through 1990, students at 3 Maryland universities collected, researched, and transcribed numerous local legends. This material has finally come to rest in the holdings of the University of Maryland. In 1973, University of Maryland student Patricia Johnson submitted a paper titled The Bunnyman. This paper was compiled as part of the coursework for a class entitled Introduction to Folklore. She interviewed 33 students from Prince George's County, Maryland, ages 15 to 18. Ms. Johnson relates that the tale met all of the qualifications of an urban belief tale. Specifically, it takes place in an urban setting, existed prior to her project, and had appeared in print as truth. She goes on to state, included in this collection is an article from the Washington Post which verifies the story as truth. This was an important claim, as I had found no primary sources to date. I was extremely frustrated to find that the page containing the referenced article was missing from the original paper. With any hope of a quick resolution gone, I turned to examining the paper itself. Johnson's informants told 54 variations of the story. A rough tally revealed the following. A. 14 different geographic locations are mentioned. B. 18 involve the Bunnyman chasing or frightening people, usually children, with a hatchet or axe. C. 14 tell of attacks on cars. D. 9 claim he attacked a couple parked in a car. E. 5 accuse him of vandalism on homes or buildings. And F. Only 3 mentioned a murder. Based on the widespread geographic locations and the significant variation represented in the tales, Johnson concluded that the Bunnyman was an urban belief tale. In short, the Bunnyman did not exist. Breakthrough. After rereading Johnson's paper several times, I finally noted that she heard the tale for the first time around Halloween 1970. Having no better leads, I began a systematic search of the Washington Post from October of that year in hopes of finding the previously cited news article. I was elated and not a little surprised to find the following. Man in bunny suit sought in Fairfax. Fairfax County Police said yesterday they are looking for a man who likes to wear a white bunny rabbit costume and throw hatchets through car windows. Honest. The next one is Air Force Academy cadet Robert Bennett told police that shortly after midnight last Sunday, he and his fiancée were sitting in a car on the 5400 block of Guinea Road when a man dressed in a white suit with long bunny ears ran from the nearby bushes and shouted, "You're on private property and I have your tag number." The rabbit threw a wooden-handled hatchet through the right front car window, the first-year cadet told police. As soon as he threw the hatchet, the rabbit skipped off into the night, police said. Bennett and his fiancée were not injured. Police say they have the hatchet, but no other clues in the case. They say Bennett was visiting an uncle who lives across the street from the spot where the car was parked. The cadet was in the area to attend last week's Air Force Navy football game. When I began this project, the aspect that puzzled me most was the bunny suit. I expected to find that the legend was spawned by an event that was strange or in some way notable, but I never suspected the Bunnyman really was a Bunnyman. I was even further surprised to find a second appearance recorded 2 weeks later. The rabbit reappears. A man wearing a furry rabbit suit with 2 long ears appeared again on Guinea Road in Fairfax County Thursday night, police reported, this time wielding an axe and chopping away at a roof support on a new house. Less than 2 weeks ago, a man wearing what was described as a rabbit suit accused 2 persons in a parked car of trespassing and heaved a hatchet through a closed window of the car at 5400 Guinea Road. They were not hurt. Thursday night's rabbit, wearing a suit described as gray, black, and white, was spotted a block away at 5307 Guinea Road. Paul Phillips, a private security guard for a construction company, said he saw the rabbit standing on the front porch of a new but unoccupied house. I started talking to him, Phillips said, and that was when he started chopping. All you people trespass around here, Phillips said the rabbit told him as he whacked 8 gashes in the pole. If you don't get out of here, I'm going to bust you in the head. Phillips said he walked back to his car to go get his handgun, but the rabbit, carrying the long-handled axe, ran off into the woods. The security guard said the man was about 5 feet 8, 160 pounds, and appeared to be in his early 20s. 2 documented appearances by a bunny-suited figure in the same Fairfax County community. Was this the Bunnyman, or just copycats acting out stories they had heard from somewhere else? Again, I turned to Johnson's paper for clues. As mentioned earlier, 14 of her tales mention a couple in a parked car being attacked, but 9 of these specifically mention a hatchet being thrown into the car. Of the 5 mentioning vandalism, 2 describe columns being chopped. The story told by 17-year-old G. Taylor was particularly revealing. She related, I think it was last year or maybe before that, I came home from school. I was listening to the news. I had just gotten in and I heard there was a man and a woman sitting in a car. It could have been teenagers, but they were just parked and all. And all of a sudden they looked up and there was this bunny. This giant bunny just ran out of the woods, from behind the trees and all. And he ran in front of the car. And he had a hatchet and he threw it through the car and just turned around and went back away. They were just shocked. They just sat there and watched. Then an old man came out of the house and warned them to get off his property. They tried to explain and everything, but he just wouldn't listen. And then they took it to the police afterwards. And the police, went back and all asked him if he had seen anything. And nobody had seen it until a couple days later. Then a lot of people were saying that they had seen the Bunnyman. And then after that, the police tried to investigate, but they couldn't get anything. And then they found these places that sell costumes and all. And they found that it hadn't been but 3 people that had bought costumes. Then they, long put theirs away and brought them back and all. And it wasn't them. And nobody ever found out about the Bunnyman. It just went on for a couple weeks and then it died out. Miss Taylor's recollections are important for a number of reasons. First, she identifies the television news as her source of information. Second, she accurately relates the hatchet thrown into the occupied car, the teenage couple, the accusation of trespassing, and police involvement. Third, she states that it went on for a couple of weeks, then stopped. Lastly, she identifies the time frame to within 6 months. The October 22nd news story is clearly the origin of the tale she told. Moreover, although the story had mutated noticeably in 22 years, many of Johnson's 53 other versions also contain recognizable elements of the October 1970 incidents. Newspaper accounts and oral reports can be revealing, but neither can be trusted to be completely accurate. It was time to look for more trustworthy records. Official reports. The Fairfax County Police Department had no official record of the October 18th assault on Robert Bennett and his fiancée, but they do have an investigation report relating to the October 29th vandalism incident. Although FCPD is not required to release any information relating to misdemeanor offenses, they kindly supplied a redacted copy of the report for this project. The investigation report confirms the basics of the event as told in the October 31st Washington Post article. At 10:30 p.m. on October 29th, 1970, 6 officers responded to 5307 Guinea Road for a subject dressed as a rabbit with an axe. The officers found no rabbit, and the case was turned over to investigator W.L. Johnson of the Criminal Investigation Bureau. Johnson began with a visit to the construction offices of the Kings Park West subdivision on October 31st. He found no rabbit, but did receive a call shortly after his visit from someone who worked at Kings Park West. The caller claimed to have just received a telephone call from someone identifying himself as the Axeman. The Axeman allegedly said, "Mr. Blank, you have been messing up my property by dumping tree stumps, limbs, and brush and other things on the property." The Axeman further stated that You can make everything right by meeting me tonight and talking about the situation. The representative from Kings Park West stated that the caller sounded to be a white male in his late teens or early 20s. The police set up a stakeout, but the Axeman never materialized. On November 4th, investigator Johnson received a call from a resident of the area who informed him that her son claimed to know the identity of the Bunnyman. She stated that some of the neighborhood children who have seen or been with the Bunnyman described him as an older teenager. Johnson interviewed the son, age 8, and eventually learned that he had not actually met the Bunnyman, but had only heard of the Bunnyman at school from the rest of the children talking about him. Interviews with other neighborhood children had similar results. On March 14th, 1971, Johnson wrote the following summary. After a very extensive investigation into this and all other cases of the same nature, it is still unsubstantiated as to whether or not there really is a white rabbit. The only people who have seen this so-called white rabbit have been children of rather young ages and the complainant in this case. Upon interviewing everyone in this case that may have any knowledge of any incidents concerning a white rabbit, that has been no significant wow, what the heck? There has been no significant information uncovered that would lead to the identity of the person or persons that were posing as a white rabbit. This case will be marked as inactive. His identity. Who was the Bunnyman, and what was he trying to accomplish? Sadly, we will likely never know his identity. Likewise, his true motivations are known only to himself. There are a few clues contained in the foregoing sources. On October 18th, the Bunnyman accused Robert Bennett of trespassing. On October 29th, the Bunnyman told security guard Paul Phillips that you all trespass around here. And on November 4th, the self-styled Axeman accused the unnamed representative of Kings Park West subdivision of dumping debris on his property. If we assume that all three incidents involved the same individual, then it appears that this young man was disturbed by the development of the area. Said development was extensive in 1970. Until the Second World War, Fairfax County was a rural farming community. And then the buildup of federal employment in the region fueled intensive residential development in the closer suburbs of Arlington and the Fairfax counties. The 1950s saw tract housing being built in Springfield, McLean, Annandale, and Fairfax. The somewhat modest developments of the early 1960s eventually gave rise to near town-sized projects like Reston and Burke Center. Kings Park West is a subdivision of over 1,500 homes and was one of several such developments either built or under consideration for the Burke area at the time of the incident. James W. Robinson's secondary school opened the next year with nearly 3,900 students. While Fairfax County began to look seriously at land use planning issues in the 1950s, the first countywide comprehensive land use plan was not adopted until 1975. Many people living in Fairfax County in the 1960s and 70s were disturbed to see pastures and woods give way to roads, subdivisions, and shopping centers. Being forced to watch helplessly while the face of your community changes around you can elicit strange behavior in some people. And what was the significance of the bunny costume? I am not prepared to even hazard a guess. Conclusion. Who the Bunnyman was and what was motivated him to act in such a bizarre manner is still a mystery. However, the available evidence points to the October 1970 events as the genesis of the Bunnyman legend. Many of the tales collected by Patricia Johnson in 1973 clearly derive from the events as reported in the newspaper and the television news of that period. The official police report makes no mention of any pre-existing stories that this individual could have been copying. Furthermore, William L. Johnson specifically stated that the author that he found no indications of any earlier stories or criminal incidents involving an individual dressed as a rabbit. It's also plainly evident that the story began to take on the features of an urban legend quite soon after the events were reported. Investigator Johnson was following leads generated by schoolyard rumors less than 2 weeks after the first appearance of the Bunnyman, and by the time Patricia Johnson began her work 2.5 years later, the story had mutated in location, frequency, and severity. And there you have one interpretation of the story. So in October of 2015, Jenny Cutler Lopez wrote an editorial titled "Long Live the Bunnyman." The reported child killer lunatic roaming the woods of Clifton may be more like us than we think. In this, she talks about speaking to some of the locals in the area. One of the people that she spoke to was Jim Waters. Jim Waters was 11 years old in 1970. And of course, during that time, after the original incidents occurred with the hatchet being thrown through the car window and the man in the bunny suit on the porch, all the school kids were talking about it and whatever. And that's kind of around the time that the urban legend was truly born, right? So, he's quoted here as saying, the story went from a guy in a white bunny suit with an axe who vandalized a couple of times to an axe murder at the end of Guinea Road. As an 11-year-old, I couldn't give it any perspective. So, collaging firsthand experiences, local myths, and imagination, Waters and fellow guitarist Chris Pillar spent 18 months writing a 2.5-hour rock opera told from the Bunnyman's perspective. They performed it with their band Mantua Finalis through 2013 and 2014. I think that's amazing. That's really cool. Legend of the Bunnyman is the name of their rock opera based on this urban legend. There's also an artist named Jessica Calista. This is in 2015. She had a studio called Ollie Ollie, and she used this story as a kind of a jumping off point, and looks at it as a way of putting the whole, idea of all of the like fruit orchards and horse ranches and blackberry bushes and all that stuff aside for, urban sprawl and modernization and just being completely taken over by the suburbs, concrete, asphalt, no more fresh air. How dare you? No more open land and open areas. And it's funny because like the more we cram a bunch of people together, the lonelier it can be because you kind of fall into these ruts. I was reading an article and there's one line where she mentions being, having to take a 30-minute walk to get out of the suburb. So like not having any real, community or sense of community, because it's like, you work, you got the daily grind and you go home and then you don't really, like there's not a whole lot to do in that area, especially, this is just America, suburbia, all the, and this article is written like pre-COVID, so imagine how it is now. But look in this, one of the quotes in the article, it says, but there's a price to pay. Suburbia is lonely. Few people have time for community if they want to afford the dream. Suburban sprawl creates crawl spaces for us to slip unnoticed through life. Protracted mental health problems abound. 30% of Northern Virginians are considered at high risk for chronic binge drinking. 1 in 4 teenagers suffers from depression, and 1 in 4 adults lives with a diagnosable mental illness. So, yeah, and that's not just isolated to Virginia, especially now, but Callista, she actually told her husband she wanted to leave Fairfax County and move somewhere in the Midwest, perhaps closer to her close-knit hometown of Alton, Illinois, on the Mississippi, or to D.C., somewhere she could build a community of artists. And her husband said, ask yourself what you want and just make it happen here. And those words changed her life. She formed the Bunnyman Bridge Collective. And she has, like I said, I don't know if it's still there, but at the point of this article, she had a studio called Ollie Ollie, like Ollie Ollie Oxenfree, and she created this collective to, connect her suburbanites and get all these people, interacting with each other. There's a bunch of exhibits, and they plan all kinds of events and stuff to kind of get people into the community and help, build community, support the local artists. And, it's kind of cool that all of it came from this this urban legend that was just a couple of isolated incidents that got blown up into this, larger than life thing. But at least something good has come from all of it. Not to mention the fact that like little kids get scared around Halloween about it, whatever. So it's kind of cool. Anyway, so that's it. That's the tale of the Bunnyman Bridge. And so thank you for listening, and I will see you next time. Don't forget to check out my links, Disruptive Girl on Instagram, and all that fun stuff. And I will see you next time. Bye.